Alright, everyone, welcome back to the DiamondColossus show, and we're going to be talking about my 2021 Overwatch League preseason rankings. Ignore the top part here where it says 2020. The the rankings system I use by Solomon.io has not been updated for this coming season, but we have titled it correctly. Now, I'm going to be separating, like many people, the teams into the Asia Pacific region and the North American region, since very little times will we see them overlap, and because of that, I do not want to judge them on an overall standings list, because a lot of that overall standings will be affected because of how they play each other per region. So let's go ahead and separate these teams out. And to those who don't know, I'll explain a little bit. The What it means to be in the APAC region or the North American region simply means where these teams are playing from. The Asia Pacific region will have many of the Asia teams from China and Korea, and a few of them that you see like Philadelphia and New York, who have chosen to go over to the Asia Pacific region and play in that area. And then the North American region up top here is the teams that are playing in North America or around it. Two of the teams will be in Europe. Obviously, you see London and Paris as two teams there. They will play themselves. They will play in Europe and connect over to the NA side. So that's why they're being put over with the rest of North America. I'm going to start with the APAC region, because the APAC region is a lot smaller and it's easier, in my opinion, to do. So let's go ahead and pop up our good friend Liquipedia here. League, and pop up our teams. Once I hit the search button, that would help. Alright. But we're just going to pop all these teams up. This way, everyone who's watching, if you're not familiar with it, I can... there's no point in opening up theirs, but I'll get to that in a second. This way, you can also have some visual on knowing what I'm talking about when I mention these rosters. Because I know these rosters, but I know a lot of you may not follow the Overwatch League, so I'm having to help you out as well. So, let's start with the bottom of the Asia Pacific region. And it's going to be the Los Angeles Valiant, more than likely. Because of that, as you can see where it says former, the Valiant currently still don't have a roster. The Los Angeles Valiant currently still don't have a roster. They got rid of everyone, their staff and players, so we're kind of waiting on them to announce their Chinese roster. So, when it comes to the Valiant, we're already done. We're putting them at the bottom, since we don't know what they're going to have. And more than likely, most of the good talent's been picked up already. There's a few other outside talents that they can go for, but most of it's already been picked up, so you're not looking at anything too scary. Now, who I think's above them, I know a lot of people are high on them right now, but I think Chengdu is just right above them. I look at this team, and there's nothing about it that screams to me that it's going to be that much better. I am happy to see their old coach Ruby come back, because I do believe he is a very good Chinese coach. And there are some highlights like Faraway 1987 and Gaga. Their main support lacks. Their off-tank will be Elsa, and I'm just a little concerned. I, at first, was high on Gaga a lot more. I think he's still going to be good for this team, and I mentioned that I think he's a good part. But I've also had issues learning more and more, since I don't get to watch Chinese contenders, that it might be a bit more of just a better Ameng, who's a ball one trick, essentially. And it makes me really scared that they haven't actually gone and taken the time to get an actual main tank. And because of that, I can't put them that much higher than where they are. I don't expect a whole lot from this roster. The next team's actually already in order for me, which is the Hangzhou Spark. Let me get rid of that so I can lower up these tabs. The Spark. This roster should be good, but that's what we said last year, and they underperformed massively compared to their first season. They have good players in Architect, Gushui, Bernard's really good that they picked up. MCD I rate highly, but their main support in IDK and Mika kind of lack, and I think that's going to hurt them a good amount. Their second DPS, I've heard Shy is good, but I don't know. Somansu, I don't know where he fits in this roster because Godspeed's really good. Godspeed's also really good. So Godspeed Architect is the lineup I say you will see most of the time. I just don't know where Somansu fits in here. I feel like he's just taking up a roster slot. Takuyaki, I am pretty excited for. I think he will be pretty fun to watch. But obviously it'll take him a bit of time before he becomes of age into the season. But right now my problem with this roster is I have no faith in them. I look at this roster and I say, yes, this should be a really good roster. But I think all the other rosters are better in the end. And it's hard for me to look past that I don't have faith that this roster is going to work. Next, I'm going to put the New York Excelsior there because I'm scared for this roster, I guess. I like Bianca. I thought Bianca was a really good off-tank last year. Obviously, we know Jonak is one outstanding flex support when MVP Season 1. There's a lot to be... Ivy's actually a really, really good flex DPS. And I've heard good things about their other DPS line. Their main support scares me on Friday because he comes from a team that a lot of people apparently must have been just... This is weird. I'll talk about this for just a second. As you can see, he's from OZ Gaming, Odds Gaming. There have been like 4 players that have all been picked up from this team from 4 different teams. The Gladiators got one, New York got one, Florida got one, and I think there's a 4th one I can't think of. I'm not thinking of at the moment. But like that's at least 3. 3 players from this one team that didn't perform that well in contenders at all. Like pretty badly performed. So I'm interested to see how he performs coming into the league. He might be just a really underrated talent. So this might be a very good pickup. This also could probably be very bad for them. And I think that's why I'm not high on New York. Yakpung I'm not high on as a main tank. And a little too much of their unknown DPS talent is lurking for me. That's why I'm going to put New York right above Spark. But New York, I think, has a higher ceiling than these bottom 3 teams. I think New York can actually really surprise. Next is going to be the Seoul Dynasty. The Seoul. I am beyond happy that you went and actually signed to you as your main off-tank. And you're going to run him as your actual off-tank. I think Creative's a really good flex support. I think Gesture, when he's in playoffs, is really good. Just don't play him during regular season. Marvel is a really good main tank. Fitz and Profit is so good as a DPS line. And Animo is shown that he's still got it as a main support. So why am I rating them so lowly? It's because this is the Seoul Dynasty, and just like last year, I'm believing they're going to be inconsistent. That every other week, they're just going to not be able to play the game and come in and lose. I just can't have faith in this roster. It's such a stacked roster this year. It is one of Seoul's probably best rosters they've ever seen. And yet I don't think it's going to work. And that's why I rate them where they are. I think they could easily be number 1 in APAC if they weren't inconsistent. But since they're inconsistent, there's just, to me, no way they're going to be able to become number 1. And I think they're going to be 4th at best. The next 3 are actually in order, and we'll still talk about them. I think the Charge comes next. Let me get rid of the Seoul Dynasty so we can go to the Charge. I feel like everyone's still underrating this roster. Yes, there are, like, a lot of people look at what they lost in Shu, Happy, and Nero and are like, oh, this team's not going to be good. And I don't understand that. Because, first off, they also lost these 3, technically, at the same time. But Dwea and Crystal literally never saw play, so it's not that big of a deal. Chara, you got Mandu, who I think is a massive upgrade over Chara. You have Kariv, who is, in my opinion, a small downgrade from Chu. Kariv is a really good flex support and has shown it in the Nexus Cup that played recently that he is still really good. And I'm excited to see Kariv on this team. Krong was here last year. Rio was here last year. Both solid tank line. Krong, a MVP candidate last year in his rookie season. This guy is just absolutely insane. Eileen is a really, really good DPS. I've heard good things about Kaylee and Choice in One. Both of them very, very good talents that I've heard good things of, and saw in the Nexus Cup that they actually did have some good pieces to them. And Jihoon, a good ball player, just to come in and play wrecking ball when they need him to. So I think this team has it. I think they also now have Arachne as a head coach, who was the head coach of, I think, Talon? Yeah, of Talon Esports, and then went, obviously, to be an assistant coach for the San Francisco Shock. I think this guy is a really good head coach and has picked up Neko, who I think has been an assistant coach before. He used to play, but is also... No. He played for O2 Blast, and this is his first coaching job. So we'll have to see how Neko plays, or how Neko coaches, and Damon, who was a player and now a coach. So, a little bit of a weak assistant coach lineup, I would say, but I'm high on the I'm high on this roster. I think this roster is going to be really good. I just think the other two are going to be better, and that's where we go to the Philadelphia Fusion. Philadelphia. So, part of me pains me for putting them this high, and I think I might change it, actually. Possibly. Yeah, I think the Charge roster is better. But still, we'll talk about Philadelphia here. Carpe is an elite hit scan player. And I think they've just done nothing but play more to that than they did last year. And they were really good last year. Shockwave is a very flexible, mostly hit scan, but very flexible player. He can play some flex, from some projectile, I should say. And EQO is their main projectile player, who is still a phenomenal talent. Bit of a question mark, though, since it felt like for the past 2 years they've tried to get rid of him, and yet he's now back on this roster. So I don't know. We have Funny Astro, who I think is one of the best main supports in the league. Alarm, who is, in my opinion, the best flex support. Never mind, the second best flex support in the league. There's one better. Oh, I almost said a very bad thing. We'll get to that guy in a moment, but Alarm's such an insane talent. He's so good. Poco's a really solid off tank, and I think Mono's better than who they lost in Sato of main tank. So I'm glad to see Mono on this roster. I just think this roster is going to be solid. I forgot they got 9K as their head coach, another one who was under the Krusty Church of San Francisco Shock's coaching structure from Krusty. He went to the Paris Eternal and was the GM there. I think he was the GM. Yeah, he was the GM there at Paris. And I'm going to look at Paris real quick. Former 9K. General manager. Yeah, he was general manager. And so he's now coming in as a head coach here. And Paris did well last year. Paris did really well. So I think 9K is going to have a big impact coaching-wise, at least. This roster may not be as strong or as scary as some of the ones below them, in my opinion, but I think it's the coaching structure that really makes me high on this roster. So, there's Philadelphia, and now we go to the Shanghai Dragons. That's just a good lineup. That's just a good lineup. Like, they were number 1 in APAC last year. They're going to be number 1 in APAC this year. Fate has showed that he is still a really, really good main tank. He's got the skill still there. I thought he might be slightly less than just a few years ago when he played on the Valiant. I said it, and I believed it, that Fate was, at the time, the best main tank in the world. He was a very, very good talent. His skill was undeniable. He was good on almost all the tanks, and he did seem to take a step backwards, but I think he's finding his former glory, and will find it even more on Shanghai. Void, really good off-tank. He didn't get to see a whole lot of skill shown off in the Gladiators when he was there, but last year, when he first moved to Shanghai, he just lit the world on fire and showed that he is a top elite off-tank right there. Lip, a rookie last year that took the world by storm, that showed that he is a really good Sombra player. His hit scan is pretty solid, but I would definitely favor Diam's hit scan, and that's why they brought him back, and I'm glad they brought him back, because the 4 DPS here with Erster, Diam, Fleta, and Lip. Fleta, if anyone didn't know, was last year's MVP. He is a very good, flexible DPS player. He's just not he's a lot more passive, and you don't put a lot of resources in him. Versus, I think Erster's going to be that more resource heavy flex DPS player, and I think that's going to be what they're looking for in certain metas and certain compositions that they need to run. But otherwise, this quad of DPS is so good, and you can fluctuate them in and out, and probably never see any downfall in the team's synergy. Molly, I've heard I really did like from Chengdu, and I'm excited to see him on this roster. I do love Izayaki, and I think Izayaki will see most of the starting time. But Izayaki's weakest flex support, in my opinion, is his Ana, and I think that's where Molly's strongest is. So I do think there's a strong chance if we see a Ana heavy meta, Molly will come in and be perfectly fine for this roster. And then we've got Lee Jae-gon. Look, a lot of people saw Super's stream, and I was there too. I saw where he pointed out Lee Jae-gon fed a bit when they played the Shock. Yes. And I've been saying this for a while that Lee Jae-gon was getting slightly overhyped because there were moments where he cost his team a good fight. Like, he would do something that was kind of dumb. But does that make Lee Jae-gon not one of the top 3 main supports in the league? No. He is still one of the top. He's so good. His mechanics is what makes him so scary. He, mechanically on Lucio, is just terrifying. And his Brigitte is actually one of the best in leagues as well. He's just a little over-aggressive. And I think if they can rein that in a bit more or play into that a bit more, either one, you'll see Lee Jae-gon not be a quote-unquote feeder nearly as much. So now we move on to North America. We're going to start with the easy part, and we're going to start top down because I think the top's easier to talk about than it is the bottom, because I think the bottom's going to be more complicated. So obviously the number one, we still have to go with the San Francisco Shock. 2-time Overwatch League victory champions. That they're the reigning champions at the moment. You have most of the team coming back. This was the man. Violet was the one that is the number one flex support in the league. His Zen is just unbelievably good. It's scary. His aim, his raw mechanics on flex support is beyond terrifying. And Super has said it before, and obviously, yeah, they're teammates, but he does, I think, truly believe it. That he says right now, Violet's probably the best player in the Overwatch League. And I could believe it, because Violet's mechanics are just nasty. They're so good. And his positioning, his understanding of the game is just, it's beyond everyone else's. But even then, you still have an elite main tank in Smurf, a really good line 1 trick in Super. I'm joking. Super is still a really solid main tank, but let's be honest, he rides the bench because of Smurf. Shoyobin, a phenomenal off tank. Twilight, another, like, it's crazy that when we're like, oh yeah, this is number 1 flex support, Twilight's probably like number 3, number 4 on the same roster. And then FD God, I think he's number 4 and probably main support. He looked so good last year on Paris, and I'm excited to see him on Shock because I think he will unlock a new potential. They lost Ons, which was a big blow in my opinion, and through 2020 they also lost Rascal, Architect, and Sinatra. So their DPS definitely hurt. Obviously, you see Moth. We'll get to Moth. But I think FD God's not that much more of a downgrade, and I think he can potentially even be an upgrade in the end over Moth. Very, very high potential there. But the biggest thing to me is their DPS. You at first might be like, wow, they lost a lot, and they did. But I think that what they've gained is just as good. I rate Glister highly after London. I think what he showed on London was just phenomenal, and made me really excited to see him play more. Nero, a really, really good flex DPS, and there's a reason why people are not. He's one of the reasons why I would say people aren't as high on the charge, because Nero was a phenomenal flex. I think I said flex support earlier. Flex DPS, and his ability to play most of projectile characters is really, really good. Tayo, I think a lot of people are like, oh yeah, he's just the guy that exists. I actually do think Tayo has some unique pieces to him, that will help kind of, what am I trying to say? Help fill this roster's small weaknesses otherwise, but Striker still a phenomenal tracer player, the best tracer in the game, and probably still, and it's still a very phenomenal hit scan player in general. So this lineup is still stacked. Number one, easily, until they don't win, they're easily number one. Number two, at the beginning of the offseason, I wouldn't have said this, but through a lot of matches that we've seen recently, I actually am going to put this. I'm going to put the Los Angeles Gladiators at number two. This team is extremely stacked. Space is the best Western off-tank. Muse, I'm high on, and I'm excited to see play for this roster. I think he's going to come in and play very well. He proved that he could play very well in Korean Contenders. So I think this was I think that besides, since Fisher, that this is might be the first Gladiators main tank we've had that's actually exciting to be excited for. Okay, OGE was, but OGE kind of faltered. And I think this is the first time that Muse won't, our main tank won't falter. We got Moth, who is the number one main support right now in the league. That's unarguable. He is number one. His Lucio and Mercy are, bar none, the best. Like, just easily the best. We have Kevster, who played on Ping last year and still looked like an unstoppable god. Birdering looked so good. He looked peak Birdering again, in my opinion, and carried the Gladiators to many wins last year. So his hit scan prowess is still phenomenal. And Mirror is just weirdly flexible in so many ways. The man seems like he can technically play everything. So this is a scary DPS trio, in my opinion. Just absolutely scary. You see, we picked up Shu from the Charge, a really highly rated flex support. I think I'd probably say maybe, like, I think some people would even say he's number 3 in the league. I don't know if I'd go that high. I might actually. She was such kind of a silent carry, in my opinion, on the Charge. And even though I thought the Charge was phenomenal last year, and they were, she was like the one that no one talked about, but was also just part of why they were so good. And I think that's what makes this support line is one of the best in the leagues. I think this tank line is a solid one, and I think this is one of the scariest DPS trios. And so, and I'm actually high still on DP as a coach. I know some people might not be. I'm glad that Miss Brendan Sue, she has come to take the general manager role from him, because I think that helps DP no longer have to worry about both things he's doing, because he was GM last year and head coach, and now he can put she can come in and take the general manager, which she was the general manager, if I'm not mistaken, of the Charge, and they ran pretty well, or at least in my opinion, they seem to be ran pretty well. And this now lets her be in her comfort zone. She can run this team while DP gets put in his comfort zone and just has to coach. It just has to be the head coach. And Face, I'm still excited for, and Todola we got from the Charge as well, who I think is a good coach. I like how I'm saying we. I'm sorry. My brain refers to it as that. I apologize, but that's how I just think sometimes. My next is Florida Mayhem. So recently, Plat Chat talked about Florida, and they weren't, and they're kind of not super high on them. I think they're wrong. I genuinely think they're wrong. I think this team is scary good. I really do think that. I do agree that the biggest question mark is OGE. OGE has not performed super well in the past, and he is a big question mark. But I think because this is the first time he's been able to play on a fully Korean team, I think that will make a gigantic difference. And with him having a really good support line with Slime and Gangnam Jin, I think his aggressive tendencies will be perfectly fine. Gargoyle, a really good off-tank that will pair with him, I think. Yaki and BQB, an insane DPS duo. And Checkmate looked really good in the Winter Ball, the Valiant Winter Ball that happened in December. So I'm excited for him. I think this team is going to, with Kuki also proving that he's actually a really good head coach, like a pretty phenomenal head coach. I think this team might be getting slept on a bit and is quite scary. My next one, I know after the Nexus Cup, a lot of people aren't high on this team. I still think you need to look at all metas and say, yeah, okay, currently in the Nexus Cup, we saw a lot of Tracer, and they don't have a Tracer player. That's true. But they also beat Soul with a different comp that no one else was running. And I think that's where you have to look at this team and say, this team is still scary. Fearless is still a really good main tank and one of the best Winstons in the league. I don't think he's number one. I think he'd probably be number 3 in my opinion, but he's definitely still number 4. Still, doesn't matter. His Winston is high. One of those in top 5 easily. Repel Fielder is interesting because they were running them kind of weirdly again. They ran him like Houston did. Now, obviously, Fielder wasn't on Houston, but Repel was. And Repel constantly switched time with Raucus at the beginning of last season, and people couldn't figure out why. And that's honestly kind of what it feels like here. Fielder, we know coming from Paris, who, mind you, Fielder played on ping from Korea to the NA server. So this man's playing on like 200 ping, so it's looking like a flipping an actual slideshow for him, and he dominated on flex support. So I think you should really just be running him almost all the time. So I'm a little concerned on that from the coaching side of things. Hanbin, really good off tank. Sparkle Doha, I think and Exy, really, really good DPS trio. Doha, I think, actually plays a lot of the roles Sparkle can't play, and Sparkle plays all the roles that Doha can't play. They have a few overlaps, like in Doomfist and stuff, but like Doha Samba is really good, and Sparkle Samba is trash. So I think they complement each other a whole lot. Exy is just the hit scan player, and Exy's raw aim is just one of the best in the leagues. His positioning could probably use some work, and I think there's some other issues with Exy, but I definitely think when we're talking just pure raw aim, Exy's so good. So I think this team is really stacked still. Jexay, I haven't talked about. Jexay also comes from Houston, and Jexay's looked really good. Jexay's looked the best player on Houston, and he's looking like the best player on Dallas already. And this is coming to a stacked roster. I think Jexay is actually really trying to fight to prove that he is a top main support in the league. So I think people are underrating Dallas just the slightest bit, because I definitely think Dallas is still a very solid team. Now we get to a bit more of the harder picks. And I'm being a little influenced by Avast, who did his the other day, and I'm going to go with the Toronto Defiant. I wasn't initially high on this roster, but the more they pick up of things, like they picked up Lashstroke, who I think is really good. I actually am high on Neist. Michelle, I think, might be a bit of a weak spot, but Sato is really good. Hisu's really good. Aztec, even though he's going to be fighting with Lashstroke, I think both of Aztec's the number 1 flex support coming from Korean contenders. Lashstroke came from the Valiant and was a phenomenal flex support there. I think either one you run is probably going to be good. The biggest weakness is Ansuje, in my opinion. Him at main support is very questionable. No one really knows who he is, and I think if you're going to see the biggest weak spot, it's going to be here or with Michelle. But I could easily see those two being replaced mid-season, is my kind of thought. The rest of this team is really solid. Ignore Beast and Logics, they're here just to exist. I think Toronto has a strong case for making top 5, maybe even punching above their belt, in my opinion. Next. Who do I think is next? I'm going to go... This is going to be my spicy take. I think Atlanta Reign next. I am extremely high on this roster, and I probably shouldn't be, but I think Gator Hawk, I think they just need a second season to prove that they are a phenomenal tank duo. Masa needs to have probably a bit more motivation, but still a very, very good main support in his own right. If Iris, which is this guy, Iris, if he gets off ping, which means he was playing in Korea. I think he was playing in Korea. For this team, I think he looks better because I've seen him in contenders. Weirdly enough, he played in NA contenders, so I don't know why he had bad ping, but I'm pretty sure I heard he had bad ping. So I'm going to hope that he's now off ping, because if he is, I know he can play well. When he was on ping, he did not look good in the league. He just didn't, and he needs to step up his game. Edison, I think, needs to. I think Edison will now be able to mostly focused on playing Tracer Sombra for this team, while Kai, who is, I'm just going to say it, probably the best hit scan in the league at the moment. He's just so unbelievably cracked, and that's coming from a crap ton of hit scans in the league that are really good. But Kai is just another caliber. He is super, super good, and because of that, I'm excited to see him paired up with Pelican, who they picked up recently this past offseason, who looked really good in the Valiant Winter Ball. And I think this will be a scary DPS duo with Edison coming in when they need to play Tracer. So, yeah, I am high on this roster, and I think they are going to be performing a lot better than what people initially think. Next is the team I think people are overrating a bit, and why I have them so low. Washington Justice. Oh, they have announced Assassin, who I did not see. They just announced him today. Cool. So they did pick up another flex DPS. So this will change my opinion a slight bit. Because now this means Decay plays Hitscan and Assassin will play flex DPS. Because you won't probably run Tuba and you probably won't run Jerry. They're just weaker versions of both the two that you're going to probably run, in my opinion. So, I'm still going to leave them where they are, even though they've now assigned Assassin. Because I do think Assassin upgrades this roster, but I'll get to why I'm still low on this roster. Fury Mag is going to be a phenomenal tank line. Arguably, maybe the best in the league. It's going to be up there. As long as Fury plays like he's played in the past and Mag doesn't disappoint. Mag has a lot of high expectations on him, and I do think people are just assuming he'll be good, and I do think there's a part where there's a chance that he flops. But okay, if I think so highly of their tank line and their DPS line, why are they down here? And that's these two. I think Closer Bebe is actually one of the weakest support lines in the league. Genuinely. This is such a weak support line. And I don't see why people kind of just overlook it and feel like they're just giving this a pass. Closer did not look good on Dallas, in my opinion, and was replaced on London for a reason, because the other main supports on London were better. And then Bebe was released from the Spark, who he never looked that good to me. He just didn't look that good. And I think people are giving this support line a pass, and I don't justify it. This support line is very weak, and I think will cost Washington several games against these top opponents. And it's going to be on their tank and DPS line that's going to make them survive. Who's next? Next is Boston. I did not think coming into this offseason I would have Boston this high. Thought they would be at the bottom again. But with picking up Faith to pair with Myungbong, who did Faith play for? I think I know. WGS Phoenix, yep. A phenomenal main support coming from contenders. Myungbong, who we know is still a phenomenal flex support. Stam 1, who came from Shanghai last year, so we know he's actually a pretty solid main tank. Soon, who I think is a very top elite hit scan player. Valentine as a very looked up as a hot commodity for flex DPS coming this past off season. So pretty excited to see if he works out for them. You've got Punk, who looked really good on off tank. Those are your 6 that I'm excited for. I am 37. I'm not too concerned on Fusions and Color Hex, who I think both are slightly underrated. When I say they're underrated, I mean that very loosely. They are not super good overall. They have talent, but I don't think they'll ever have enough talent to replace any of the starting 6. And therefore, don't expect to see those 3 probably play. I would most of the time just say Myungbong, Stam 1, Soon, Faith, Valentine, Stam 1, and Punk. That's your 6, and but it is a very good lineup. So I think they'll have a lot of success against these bottom teams and punch their way up. Maybe I say probably past Toronto. I think that's their skilling, is potentially past Toronto. Next is the Houston Outlaws. I actually do think Houston is next because they have an interesting, a very, very interesting lineup, in my opinion. Because I think Django and Piggy might be an actually solid tank line. I think Jake is a good flex DPS, and yes, he's coming out of retirement for everyone who didn't know. But I still also don't see him playing over Hydration, who I think is a lot better of a flex DPS. Dante, who's a probably second best tracer in the league. Really, really good tracer player. Really good tracer player. Then you have Happy, who we from Charge, who a lot of people think was a really good hit scan, and he is a good hit scan. I think he was kind of inconsistent a little bit, so I'm a little worried about him here. So the problem comes to more of their support line of Joby. Yes, he's underage. He'll be aged by the time he can play because he's their only main support. He has to be. Crimso's also their flex support, and I think Crimso is really solid, but this is one of the few support lines that I think is actually weaker than the Justices, and it hurts this team a lot. And with so many, their DPS seem kind of all over the place. Now Jake won't be playing much. He said he's supposed to be mostly coaching, so it's going to be KSF and Hydration fighting for playtime. Still, this isn't a very good DPS lineup in my opinion. It's pretty mediocre with a tank line that is unknown, so I don't rate him very high. Next. Between London and Paris. Vancouver's going to be last. We'll go ahead and talk about them. They're going to be at the bottom. I think Linkser, when he is hitting his shots, is one of the best hit scans in the league. But Linkser is one of the biggest, probably the most inconsistent hit scan in the league. He always has been and always probably will be. Fire, I actually think, is an underrated main support. I think he is actually really good. Fried Wiener, I think he is actually going to be he's a mediocre off tank. He's middle of the pack in my opinion. And I think that's okay for this team because I don't think that's going to be the weak spot. The weak spots are flex support with Rolf used to be really good, but just so many have outpaced him now that I don't think it's going to work out. Shredlock did not look really good on main tank. Dalton I know can play really good on hit scan, but I'm scared they're not going to let him play his role again. Even though they picked up Taro with a flex DPS, the problem there is he's the only Korean on a fully Western roster. And now I'm scared that the communication is going to be an issue. So this team has just too many issues and too many question marks. And with all that on top of the now, we're saying these players aren't like if they had like the roster of Washington, but I had some of these question marks, I would still put them higher because the just pure like that's why Washington is so high to me. Still is the pure mechanics and pure skill on that roster is still super good. So Vancouver just lacks that as well. So I think right above Vancouver is going to be Paris. And it pains me to say this because I actually really I think if I'm taking Paris over London when we're talking pure, so these two are very comparable because both of them sent away their previous rosters and picked up nothing but contenders talent. And this is important to know because if we were talking about just that contenders talent, even though London Spitfires was the British Hurricanes who dominated contenders beforehand, I actually would rate Paris higher than London because I think this team has more skill, more potential, and their coaching staff's better. But there's one piece that makes this a big difference, and I'll get to him in just a second, and why London wins out in the end. With Paris, Onigan is a very good DPS player, and he did not get to show off all his talent on Dallas last year, so I'm glad he's been given a second shot. Naga's looked really good in contenders. Elivote we know is one of the best Western, like probably second best Western off tank in the league, well in the world honestly. The only one above him is probably Space at this time. That's not saying a whole lot since most of them are Korean. Most off tanks are Korean, but when it comes to the West, Elivote is a really solid Western off tank. Neptuno at main support is really good. I actually am really glad to see Neptuno on this team. He also brings a veteran presence that this team's probably going to need. Con and Dan looked really good in contenders, but I'm a little concerned in them coming into the actual league. And Suna didn't look super good on Vancouver last year, so I'm a little worried. And now we get to London. So London's roster looks even worse still, except for one piece. Now, Blase came from Houston. He didn't actually come from contenders, and I am pretty high on Blase, but I don't think he's not the piece that changes it to me. Hybrid was not on British Hurricanes, and he's actually a bigger question mark since he hasn't played since August of 2020. That was when Team Doge disbanded, the last team he was on. So, okay, he played for this team, and this was not in contenders though. It was not contenders, and I rate contenders higher than any other major tournament. And this was in November. They got third. You can see Team Doge got 5th to 6th in August. He hasn't played at an elite level. As you can see, they got blown out by Exablunione and a European contenders team that was really good. So Hybrid, I've got a big question mark on. He's their hit scan player until Sparker comes of age. And a lot of people are high on Sparker, and I think they have a right to be. He did look really good in contenders, but I'm not high on Calyx. I think Calyx is a weak main support player. I think Ripa could be a really good flex support. Hottie and Molfic, I think, is a really good tank line, but I just don't think it's... I think it was good in contenders, and I'm concerned on how well it's going to be in OWL. The player that really turns the tides for me is this man right here. This Shax was making an argument to even beat out Striker at Tracer. I know I said earlier Dante was probably number 2, and he might still be, but Shax is that one that's in the conversation. At minimum, Shax is 3rd on Tracer. Shax was phenomenal for Valiant. I cannot stress how much it is an insane pickup for London to have gotten Shax. It is the only reason why I think this team's better than Paris right now. Because I think that man alone will carry this team to their position. Well, that's my preseason power rankings. I hope you guys enjoyed this video, and if you would like, I'm going to be streaming later to a VOD review of the Dallas Fuel in the Nexus Cup because I want to look at their composition. So please check me out there, and check me out on Twitter at DiamondColossus. And thank you so much, guys. We'll see you in the next show.